Hello again. An alarming hunger situation is intensifying on the African continent. 346 million people in Africa are skipping meals every day. The International Committee of the Red Cross is warning that Africa's food security crisis is mostly under the radar at present due to Ukraine's humanitarian crisis. The Red Cross says it will ramp up its operations in 10 African countries as part of its hunger alleviation fight. The ICRC says the food crisis is more evident in Mauritania and Burkina Faso, cutting across the continent, across the Sahel region, all the way to the east, to the Horn of Africa in Somalia and Ethiopia. Let's talk more about this now with the International Committee of the Red Crosses. Patrick Youssef joining us now live from Nairobi. He's, of course, the ICRC Regional Director for Africa. Mr. Youssef, the numbers are not looking good. The picture that you're painting as the ICRC in terms of your advisory about the hunger crisis in Africa is really bleak.
Well, absolutely. It's big, but it's the reality. It's the stark reality of millions of Africans in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, living, unfortunately, the combined effects of armed conflicts, increasingly frequent climate shocks, like what we saw in Somalia, that hasn't lived a drought like that since the last 4 decades, food shortages, but also the adverse economic impact of COVID-19. And these are complicating matters because of the rising food prices that we see on the international market, but also the combination of so many effects that unfortunately culminate in the food and nutrition state of millions and millions of Africans today, which require an urgent response as soon as possible.
Now, we'll talk about that kind of response. What would you as a Red Cross like to see happening? But just on the conflict, I mean, the world's attention has been grabbed by the headlines, including us here, about what's happening in Ukraine with the humanitarian crisis there post the Russian invasion. But we do have conflicts here still happening, armed conflicts on our continent. And you highlight that, I mean, you've got the armed conflicts in the Sahel, in places like the DRC and Ethiopia. And finally, the Ukraine and Russia conflict is also contributing to our hunger numbers because of the rising food prices.
Well, absolutely. The Ukraine crisis has exacerbating effects, indeed. But let's first talk about Africa. As you said, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Somalia, DRC, and so many countries are still living the effects of armed conflicts in our century today. Burkina Faso alone is experiencing the fastest growing growth in displaced persons, with over 250% increase over the last 12 months. This alone is the main driver of intercommunal violence, is mainly also exacerbated by climate shocks. So we need to look also at the main and root causes that bring us into these cyclical problems that are exacerbated, unfortunately, by climate shocks. So we need to be acting on different levels, not only distributing food, water, and health, reinforcing health systems, but also looking at climate adaptation, climate financing for Africa, everything that Africa is not, unfortunately, taking on or being brought into, and that therefore the humanitarian response is what we need to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the climate issues. One of the examples you're using in your statement is about the Horn of Africa experiencing its worst drought in years following 3 successive failed rainy seasons. And then you look at South Sudan in terms of the World Food Programme. Close to 70% of the population there are facing extreme hunger. I mean, that's staggering.
Well, that's staggering, and that's... You know, since the beginning of March, Somalis, 670,000 Somalis approximately have moved from the center to areas close to where humanitarian actors are. I was yesterday speaking to someone from the northeast of Kenya who told me that when the camels start dying, the situation becomes extremely alarming. And that goes also for the Sahel, which because of the floodings have lost only for Mali 60 to 80% of the rice and cereal agriculture products. So these are realities. Unfortunately, we should not get our attention away just because there are other crises. The crisis in Africa today requires us to have a combined response bringing development actors on board, having the states also aligned, having the African Union theme of the year, which is about food security, really practiced and put in action with concrete actions that indeed should culminate in alleviating the suffering. But we also need to look at mid and long-term responses.
Yeah, what kind of responses, I mean, briefly, if you'd like to highlight? Of course, I mean, we know that for there to be response, there has to be funding, and money has been a bit tight because of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, which has also taken money away from other diseases like malaria, for example, which is still a big killer on our continent.
Well, first and foremost, we need to highlight the essential role of the Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies in every country. Without these armies of volunteers, these actions will not be possible. That's one. Second, we need to focus on the emergency needs by providing food, water, cash, whatever is possible, and support access to basic services like health and other forms of services. But we also need to focus on recovery needs and building the resilience of those farmers or herders that have the capacity to redress their own economic situation. But we shouldn't also forget that there are protection concerns. People feel unsafe in these environments. Hence, the international community, the states, and humanitarian organizations need to cater for these needs arising from these crises. So, as you can see, there are multiple things that one can absorb quite quickly in an emergency response. But as I said before, we really need to look in foresight so that in a couple of years we don't regret and repeat the same mistakes, that not looking at early warning signals and other forms, so that we can look at the lean season and prepare in advance so we don't get into April and May and start being alarmed. This is what the ICRC has done, has started already responding to the crisis, and will continue doing so.
Thank you very much for your time. Patrick Youssef is, of course, from the International Committee of the Red Cross. He's the Regional Director for the ICRC in Africa, talking to us live from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya.